Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, where every week we hear an amazing story from a serious founder who built a valuable software company and did it without big funding. I'm your host, Greg Head, and this week my guest is Bryan Forrester, the co founder and CEO of Boostlingo. Boostlingo is a really cool and practical software and tech enabled services company in the language interpretation market, which is a multi billion-dollar market worldwide. And they've got some great technology to help those language interpretation services. This isn't translation, this is live on the phone and video remote interpretation services. Bryan bootstrapped it with a little angel and has sold part of the company to growth equity investors, another part of the Practical Founder playbook. But he's growing a very large business that could be $1 billion business in the hidden and boring space of language interpretation service. He's a great CEO and he's building a big business. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, Bryan. Great to have you here.
Greg, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, we're both in Texas. I'm up here in Dallas and you're in Austin these days. How are things in Austin today?
Austin is great. It's one of those cities that is probably not, the infrastructure is not big enough to support all the people that have moved here, but we love it down here.
Okay. And you moved from California. You moved the company and everything during COVID. You're one of those Californians who came to Austin, crowded the place up. And
yeah, that's right. That's right.
And
I
still thumbs
remember
up there. Yeah.
when we moved, my wife is originally from Austin, right? And so when we
there you
moved
go.
out here, she told me, she's like, do not advertise that you're from California, because we were house
Don't tell
hunting.
anybody.
And
Yeah.
exactly. So it was, we were incognito for a while. Now I don't feel quite as bad as admitting that I'm from California, because I just know so many Californians here.
Yeah. It seemed like half of the Bay Area relocated in the last 10 years to Austin, and we see more of that. And we both have wives from Texas who bring us back to Texas.
Yeah.
So they're cheering, that kind of thing. Say, we got to make it back to Texas. Well, let's talk about your story here at Boostlingo. It's a growing software company, and you've had a little bit of a partial exit so far and done that private equity, growth equity 2 bites thing. But Bryan, why don't you just explain for everybody, what is Boostlingo these days? What is it now?
Yeah, great question. Boostlingo, from our beginnings, our mission has been to build technology solutions that expand language access, primarily language interpreting technology solutions. And I say interpreting intentionally because people that are outside the language services industry sometimes get confused between what translation is and what interpreting is. And we really focus on interpreting, which is spoken word. So we provide technology solutions for limited English people to access real-time language interpreters, sort of like you would, get an Uber or a Lyft. You can get an interpreter in over 120 languages, a human interpreter on demand on a video or audio feed. And this happens in a lot of different use cases. One of the primary customers we sell to is healthcare providers, both ambulatory hospitals, even dentist offices. And so we provide solutions that allow a patient to communicate with their doctor, the patient that doesn't speak English. But we also sell to a lot of other vertical markets like law firms, immigration law firms, for example, or you think government agencies. We sell to a lot of municipal and state government agencies. So a broad array of use cases, but our technology generally is built to help people communicate better and break language barriers.
Okay, so that's interpreting, which is probably still a massive business. It's different than translating a paragraph or a document, which, software can do pretty well. And services have been around forever to translate this book into a different language. But you're doing that live language interpretation. Somebody else is on the video, somebody else is on the phone call, somebody speaks, the interpreter translates that and speaks, and that back and forth goes for these aren't trivial things, medical, government, other
no, these
things
are
like
very,
that.
very complex conversations, but that's just kind of touching the surface of what all of our different products do, because I don't want to confuse all the viewers with too many too many descriptions of products. We have over 6 different products that we take to market that serve different kind of language interpreting use cases. And so
Right.
one of the solutions, for example, is we sell a white labeled multi-tenant software platform for language service providers. Think of them as our channel partners.
Right.
They're not the end users. So we sell to them a white labeled platform where they can manage their entire interpreting business through a single interface, a single user interface, almost like their CRM platform.
Right.
So some of your viewers might be asking, well, what's an LSP? A language service provider, there's thousands of these companies, and they are generally servicing healthcare and government customers in their geographies that they're located. And there's thousands of these language service providers. We basically provide them software that helps them scale their interpreting business. And some of that is this on-demand interpreting that I described to you before, right? Where you click a button and you get an interpreter on demand. But a lot of what these LSPs do is they provide pre-scheduled on-site interpreters. They dispatch interpreters to the hospital. So the hospital customer will request an Arabic interpreter next Wednesday, and that LSP has to find a qualified Arabic interpreter that can drive to the hospital and facilitate that job. Our software manages that workflow from end to end. So from when the request is made from the customer all the way to when it comes time to bill the customer for that job and pay their interpreter. We manage that end to end. And so it's actually much more complex than just providing an on-demand interpreting service, although that's a big part of what we do. There's a big technology layer there as well.
Okay. So you're not a language service provider providing with employees who speak all these languages, who can do all this. You have technology that powers all of these, and let's say a tech-enabled services that helps people request one, and you have a marketplace, I guess.
That's exactly right.
Okay,
yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So we actually connect all of these different LSP labor pools, right? Each of these LSPs have interpreters that work for them.
Right.
And we created this, what we call internally here, a closed marketplace where all of these different labor pools combine. And what it allows LSPs to do is source more languages because they have access to our marketplace for their customers. So if they have a hospital that needs, a couple hundred languages on demand, which is very common, right? Some of these hospitals have very rare languages that walk through their doors.
They have every language. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so a small LSP, that only has 20 interpreters isn't going to be able to provide that language on demand, but with access to our marketplace, they can. And so it's a really unique value proposition to our language service partners because they can use their own interpreters for the jobs that they can staff for. But when those interpreters can't answer a call, they can roll that over to what we call the Boostlingo hub. But really what it is a closed marketplace of labor pools.
And these are vetted, proven, established, contractors, you would say, right?
Yeah, that's right. When we started the company, we thought we would be this is back in 2016 when Uber and Lyft were still sort of novel, new, cool companies. And we thought, we'll just be the language interpreting app like Uber or Lyft. Turns out it's a lot more complicated.
Somebody for any language. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not ordering a driver. You need an interpreter that speaks a specific language, right? So you need it's like I need an Uber driver that drives a Honda Accord from 1986, but also they need to have medical training. So they can't just be a regular interpreter with basic business knowledge. They actually have to go through more extensive training. Our call routing algorithm can differentiate between all these different requests and find the right resource. So it can get quite complex if you think about it. There's so many different specialties and there's so many different languages that how you route calls is really a pretty impressive technology to build.
And there's a lot of humans in this loop. It isn't all software and AI that will do it automatically. You're coordinating human interpreters to solve real-time problems.
That's right. But we see at Boostlingo AI playing a big role in our technology.
We'll talk about that. We'll get to that one, where we're headed here. How big is Boostlingo now? Like revenues and employees, what you can say. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I can tell you is we're north of 165 people. I think at this point changes every week. So hopefully I got that number. We'll call it ballpark figure, about 165. And what I can tell you about our growth is that we've grown consistently over 50% for the last 8 years. year over year over year over year. So really fast growth. And, it's one of the things we're most proud of is what they call in the private equity world, net revenue retention.
Yeah.
Fancy way to say that when a
We
customer
crossed the
signs,
SaaS world, but private equity pays a premium for that, for
yes, it
sure.
is it's very important key performance indicator for
Mhm,
us.
mhm.
And what basically we have very high net revenue retention. And what that basically means is that when a customer signs up for us for $1 a month, 2 years later, they're paying us $10 a month. So we
Oh,
actually wouldn't even need to sign up new customers. We would still grow as a business pretty quickly. But the good news is we are signing up a lot of new customers. But it just, I think it shows that our customers see a lot of value in the
yes.
technology that we provide them.
It also shows that you have a software product. I know you have some SaaS revenue, that baseline software revenue, but you also do this kind of transactional done for you. Just like Uber, the more people click on the button, the more Uber makes. So you're wanting them to click on that button and order interpreting services through your network, and they're doing that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we have a lot of traditional SaaS software revenue, right? Every
Uh-huh.
customer that wants to use our products has to pay a subscription to do so. But we do have what we call consumption revenue.
Yes.
What you're referring to is, hey, every time somebody uses the product, they've got to pay a fee. And that's mostly because if you think about how our software is designed, we have to pay, and a lot of these calls that go through our system, we have to pay for the interpreter even though
Yeah.
they don't work for us directly. We pay those providers that then pay their freelance interpreters. So there are cogs that are
Yeah.
attached to some of those fees, but we
Yeah. Cost
also
of goods and
cost of goods.
to the
Yeah,
cost of, yeah, it's not all profit like another
not all
customer out
profit
there.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Right. Yes. Do you feel like
Yeah.
those are two kind of businesses? You have the software business that is very high margin and takes this R&D expense, and then you have this transaction revenue that has this cost in it, and they're both moving together, you know?
Sometimes I feel that way.
Yeah.
When you're explaining it to investors or just people that are used to just looking at SaaS businesses all day long, you try to find some comparable models, but it's really interesting that we think it's a very unique model, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pros and cons in each of our revenue streams. If you kind of divide it up by the subscription and the consumption may not have as much gross margin, but it's certainly expanding rapidly and predictably. The
Yeah.
one thing people love about subscription revenue is the
Right.
predictability of it. But our
Recurring.
consumption revenue is it's the whole debate around recurring versus reoccurring revenue. Um, we view all of our revenue as either recurring or reoccurring. Let's put it that way. None of this is project based work. Even the
Yeah.
consumption revenue, once they start hitting that button that you're talking about, they're going to hit that button every month. That's something that happens consistently.
And if they don't, they're not gonna pay for the software. So
That's right.
yeah.
In most
And
cases,
this is
that's right.
where people are talking about when SaaS is dead, right? Not paying by users, we're going to be paying by the result, right? It's all transaction revenue. You're kind of
At the end of the
paving the
day,
road
right?
for us to, deliver value, day after day and charge for that along the way. You started in San Francisco, raised a little money there, angel funding. So you've raised some, it wasn't completely bootstrap. You raised some angel funding, and you have some growth equity investors at Mainsail. So they're both in the practical zone. Can you give us a sense of that, and then we'll talk about those in your journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like my whole background is in built being really scrappy and frugal. Like I've built several startups basically funded by myself or a couple other angel investors. And we're not
Yeah.
talking about $1 million checks, right? We're talking about 50,000, seventy-five
Yeah.
thousand dollar checks just to get things off the ground. And that had proven to be pretty successful, right? People kept a lot of their equity. Those startups had good outcomes. Part of that was obviously luck. Some of it was just good execution, but but we had great outcomes without even talking to venture capital or even
I
institutional
didn't think that
buyers
was
at all.
possible, Brian. Like, yeah, right.
Turns out it is.
Yeah, right.
And you get a taste of that and you kind of like to wash, rinse, and repeat. Like, why
Yeah.
raise venture money
There you go.
if you don't have to?
Yeah.
Right. And especially early stage, we always took the approach of we are going to do bite-sized investments. Like we are going to fund carefully and make sure that these beta customers are actually extracting value out of the solutions we are building. And if they are, then maybe we'll put in a little bit of angel capital. Never was it part of the plan with Boostlingo to raise from an institutional buyer, because every company that I had founded or co-founded or been involved in any capacity in my past life, we sold the business before it got to a stage where I think, taking institutional cash would have really made sense.
Hmm.
And even with Boostlingo, as we were, as you said, we were founded in San Francisco, typical startup in the 2016 period, right? A lot of energy, 5 days in the office, work hard, play hard mentality, rah, rah, rah. Great culture. I think in the early days, some of our bar bills were bigger than our revenue, but that's a different story.
Team building.
We ran into COVID in
Yeah.
2020, and that changed everything for
Yeah.
us, because in San Francisco, you weren't even allowed to go in, like legally allowed to go into the office back then, right?
Yeah.
And so that, I think, that kicked us into gear into thinking about new headquarters. As I mentioned, my wife is from Austin, so she had always tried to apply pressure for me to move to Texas, but I resisted because we love the mountains, we love Napa Valley. Who doesn't love California? But because my kids were learning nothing online, and I had a kindergartner at the time trying to learn on Zoom, she convinced me. And so, because the schools were open in Texas, and we were like, we'll risk getting COVID. These kids need to go back into a classroom. And I think that was the main driver. But we had already hired some employees in Austin at Boostlingo. So it all made sense. And when we moved Boostlingo to Austin, and this was kind of in late 2020, kind of the midst of the pandemic, you have to remember, we were a remote interpreting platform. So while a lot of businesses were having some challenging times during COVID, it was actually, it turns out it's good to have a remote interpreting platform when everybody's working remotely. It poured fuel onto our fire. We were already growing rapidly before COVID, but COVID did not slow us down. And for the first time, we were profitable. We had been burning cash, I would say, not recklessly, but we were burning cash nonetheless. And we had just kind of
to build a product, get it going, and marketplaces are not easy to build and get customers and so forth.
Yeah, exactly right. The marketplace, you can imagine how hard that was to build, right? The supply and demand dynamics of making sure you have the right people online to take the right volume of calls. That's exactly right. And so
how much did you raise, Bryan, in angel funding? Those $25,000, $50,000 checks from people you knew and ran around passing the hat?
So I believe the first seed round we raised was $2.2 million, and I invested
angel funding.
In angel funding, yeah, and a good chunk of that was from myself and a few other employees. But I'd say over half of that was from outside passive investors that we had invested in previous startups we'd been involved in.
Yeah, your network, I guess, and people you knew, right? That you'd already. So you had done this before, and they were following you around saying, "What's next? We'll do it again."
What's next? How can I get in again?
Yeah, good for you.
And we had one investor who, his name's Sal Ferlazza. He was who's on our original board of Boostlingo. I'd known him a long time. He is a very successful founder in his own right. He is actually the CEO of a company called Ninja. RMM. They're actually called Ninja One now. They're a very large kind of company in the IT services channel. So he was a big investor early on for us and really helped motivate me to get involved here, because I didn't know much about the language industry when this all started. I really had to do some homework and look at the competitive landscape as you would and make sure this was the right fit. And, he helped motivate me to do that.
Well, let's talk briefly so people understand it. You grew and took on a growth equity investment from a growth equity investor, Mainsail, in 2021, which was more substantial. So they're an institutional investor in the growth equity game. We've had a few growth equity investor partners on the podcast here. Can you say something about that? And then we'll catch up with that on your journey.
Yeah. So as I was mentioning, in 2020, we started to turn a profit. I had moved to Austin. The business was doing very well. It wasn't priority number one for us going into 2021 to raise capital.
Yeah.
But Greg, once you start getting to that kind of north of 6, 7, 8 million ARR number, whatever it is, the sharks start circling the tank. You get a lot of inbounds. Hey, we're interested. Hey, let's talk.
Investors are very interested. Magically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Magically, you weren't getting any inbounds 2 years ago. And now everybody wants to be invited to your birthday party. And so you get
and
all
they're dangling this in front of you saying, here's what
yeah.
we could do.
Oh, the amount of mountains we could move for you. You wouldn't believe it, right? Mm-hmm. So you're getting a lot of inbounds. It's hard to sift through who to even talk to.
Yeah. Every founder knows this who gets over a couple million. Yep.
It's a lot of noise. But I have to say, Mainsail was one of the first to reach out and kept in touch. So I started building a relationship with Mainsail, I believe, in early 2020.
Yeah.
And I would take their calls and get to know them a little bit.
They'd be helpful. I know founders who are working with them and have worked with them. We've had a few on the podcast who work with Mainsail.
Yeah. And I'll talk more about kind of that relationship in a minute because they've been great. But they made an impression on me early on, and I think that helps. We decided as a management team, there was a lot of debate about this, whether we should even take more money. We didn't need to take more money, but what we wanted to do was hire a lot more executive muscle. We also wanted to, triple our marketing spend because the unit economics on our marketing was just fantastic.
Yay, there we go.
We're like, we just want to pump some fuel onto this fire, more.
Right.
And I didn't want to go back and try to get another 25 angels on my cap table. It didn't seem like the right timing to go back. Now, I will say a couple of those angels did re-up and reinvest alongside Mainsail. But, for the most part, a lot of them, we were able to get some secondary cash and they made a great return on their investment. So they were very happy. And we reduced.
Can you say, was that a minority investment? Or a majority, or how does that go?
The Mainsail investment, So they own a large portion of Boostlingo. We'll say that, but there's also the employees own quite a bit. They have been, one of the things I liked about them is they sort of their ops team. All these institutional buyers have an operations group that really get in the weeds and help do market studies. Talking to Mainsail, they knew more about the language industry, I felt like, than I did. I've been working in it for 7 years. I remember having conversations with them and being like, I did not know this about that company, and I did not realize this about that company. And so that impressed me because one of the reasons we got involved in the language industry from the beginning is because it may sound counterintuitive, but Silicon Valley wasn't touching this market with a 10-foot pole. I mean, they didn't.
Not too sexy for Silicon Valley.
Not too sexy for Silicon Valley. We actually loved that because the TAM was huge. I mean, we're looking at these companies at the time, there's a company called Language Line. They're still around. They're a big company. They were doing, $500 million a year in revenue or something like that. All of on-demand interpreting. And I'm thinking, wow, this market is huge. This is a huge market. And I'm not seeing any venture money spent here. So Mainsail was the first institutional buyer that I talked to. This was back in 2020. There's a lot more that have joined the party since, I think. But back then that really knew the industry well. And that resonated with me. And I thought that they had a very kind of mindful approach with how they dealt with founders, right? They really believe that businesses thrive when you leave the founder some autonomy with the management team and the founders. And
that's
get
growth
involved.
Equity versus private equity. Growth equity, is not expecting crazy things, and they really know the nitty gritty, and they don't want to throw too much fuel on the fire. But they also let founders run it and help as much as possible.
Yeah, and we had some term sheets from what I would kind of put in the private equity boat, more than the growth equity boat. And I will say this: Mainsail wasn't the highest bidder for our business. At the end of the day, we got together as a leadership team. Got together with my board and talked through all the pros and cons, kind of had a whiteboard sticky note session, and Mainsail had more sticky notes in the pro column than the con column compared to anybody else. And we knew that this is such a big market and we were still just a piece of sand on the beach. If we really wanted to accelerate growth, we were going to have to beef up our balance sheet. And we did. And so that's how that all came together. And I also, we had a lot of names on our cap table. It was ready to get rid of some of those passive investors.
Okay,
They
so
were
some of
happy.
your early angels were able to take all or some of their prize, and things got a
Exactly.
little simpler for you to manage your investor cap table. Can you say how big you were at the time? How many employees? And
Yeah, I can give you a ballpark. I think we were around 30 employees
okay,
when Mainsail invested, 25 to 30, somewhere in that
yeah,
range. So as you can see in the past 3.5 years, there's been a lot of
a
growth.
lot of
Yeah.
growth, more growth. And can you say how much you raised? Was that public? How
It
much?
wasn't public.
Okay,
What I will say is there's a lot of money that went to secondary. I think they put about $8 million into our balance sheet just to help us,
yeah,
increase our marketing spend. But it was a sizable check for a business our size. Let's just put it
okay.
that way, the overall investment. But they have always felt like just an extension of our management team, an extension of our, I feel like they are just as much mentors and advisors as they are, growth equity overlords, right? They're
Well, you
very
have a
much.
board. They're on your board, right? And
Yep.
if they don't like what you're doing, they have some say in what
What
that.
you want?
Yeah,
You want sanity checks because
yeah.
we don't always make great decisions, but they're mindful about picking their battles, right? Especially when the business is doing well. But it did change, I think, just the overall kind of mentality of our business. I went from a founder who was like, "Woo, I'm going to build another company.
Yeah, founder,
maybe we'll,
winging it. Let's go. Yeah.
yeah, exactly." Picking pennies out of the couch to see if I could, you know, fund my next marketing initiative to actually having real firepower. And it just put our brand on the map like never before. And I remember going to trade shows in the early days in our industry, these kind of niche trade shows. These are the kind of trade shows where everybody knows each other. They've been around a long time. A lot of language service companies go to these trade shows. And in the early days, nobody knew who we were. We were at one trade show, and I remember we did this keynote address where me and Dieter, my co-founder, got up on stage to give a presentation, and there were 3 people in the audience. And I think
Yeah.
there were in this giant auditorium, right? It's like 300 seats, and there's like 3 people there. And I think 2 of the people in the audience were our competitors, so that they were just taking notes on what we said. But now, we're one of the most well-established brands in the language industry, at least
Wow.
for language interpreting. A lot of that I have to give credit to Mainsail for, because without that investment at that time, it would have been really hard to build the go-to-market team that we did. Starting
So
with
they
our
help
CRO.
fuel the marketing to build the reputation and the growth engine like that, that you were not able to fund at the level. So you were able to fund marketing to boost your reputation.
Yeah, and not just that. I mean, their recruiting team is phenomenal. They helped us. Our
Okay. They
chief
helped you a
revenue
lot.
officer,
Mhm.
our chief revenue officer had worked at a previous Mainsail company. She's been fantastic, and they do a lot of go-to-market studies. They'll dive deep into our numbers, right, and come back with recommendations. Don't spend money here. Spend money here. Like the stuff that when you're doing our marketing teams working day to day, they may miss a lot of those details. They're constantly working behind the scenes and then coming up and telling us what to do, which all of that adds up to this, the sustained growth we've seen. I don't think it would be possible without that.
Well, and that's also very different than you as you're growing and you see big things. You could have raised a VC funding round,
We
but
could have.
and yeah, with private equity and growth equity, but you chose the growth equity path, very practical path in between crazy VC and the private equity overlords, as you say, that are more intense about it. And you've got a bigger company now because you want to multiply it. You probably took some secondary off the table here to help, fund your house or something like that. And you've been writing checks into the business since the beginning, but you're still a big owner of this company. And now it's worth way more than, let's say, 3 years ago when you did the investment.
That's right. We think it's worth a lot more. There's a difference between a growth mindset and a profitability mindset, right?
Yeah.
And what we write, and they're not always mutually exclusive, of course. You want both profit and growth. But I think Mainsail made it clear when they invested, we are interested in growth. We see growth opportunity.
We don't want to take profits. We don't want to squeeze you.
Yeah.
We don't want to nickel and dime you. It's about
No.
really prudent growth. Like the VC funded thing is, here's $20 million. Go.
Go. Right. Exactly.
Wave you. But these guys were all over you. They showed up with their analytics and spreadsheets and details. Because
Yeah.
why spending? It's still in the practical zone. Why spending is super powerful and has great ROI for founders.
Yeah, 100%. I think the playbook for growth equity is probably a little, quite a bit more conservative than venture.
Yes.
But they value growth over profitability to a degree. I mean, obviously they want to show that path to a lot of profitability. But if you're sitting in this large market and your unit economics are compelling, right? And your customers, I mean, Boostlingo has extremely high eNPS. And I'm sure that's a term that and I should say customer NPS, a term that a lot of your viewers probably are familiar with, net promoter scores, right? Our customers love our software. So when you have customers that love your software, you have low retention, your customer acquisition costs are really good.
So you say low churn, right? High revenue retention. Yes.
Yes, exactly. When all of that is combined, why would you slow down the growth? Why would you take your foot off the gas pedal, right? And so I think Mainsail saw that and said, "Yeah, let's shift gears into overdrive," and it worked. It worked, and I always kind of ask. We have these kind of internal meetings with the management team. Always like, what would have happened if we didn't take that money from Mainsail? What would have happened? And we could have still maybe had a positive outcome for sure. We may have already sold the business. Or, we could have gone with a different partner. And I think other growth equity partners are great. Some are not as great.
Yep.
Luckily, we chose a good one, a really good one. But I think it's, a lot of our successes do that.
Yeah. And that's their game, is we help these scrappy bootstrap founders that have proven something, still, see a big opportunity. We can come in, help them get to the next level with senior teams and detailed operations and all that. They don't need a ton of money, but some money would really help. Advanced marketing, advanced product. And you've had a couple acquisitions in there, which is often part of the playbook too. Was that instigated or supported by, your growth equity partners?
It wasn't instigated by them, but it was supported by them.
Okay, there you go.
And at that point, I had never done an acquisition as a founder.
Wow, look at you.
And so... these were companies that we bought very different reasons. We bought each of these companies. One was much more of an IP acquisition, right? They had technology that we hadn't built, and we saw it as a super high value target to acquire that technology. Whereas the other one was more of a competitive buyer, right? This is a company we were competing with, and we didn't like that we were losing a lot of deals to them. So if you can't beat them in that regard, you buy them kind of mentality. So both really compelling investment theses, but for very different reasons. But what was crazy is at the time, remember I told you we had about 30 employees when Mainsail invested, right? Well, we started doing these acquisitions maybe a year after Mainsail invested. And at that time, we maybe had 40 employees, 45. Those two acquisitions closed, I think, a week apart. So here we are trying to figure out how we're going to integrate all these different work streams into our business with a very small skeleton crew. It really put us through the paces, but I think we came out of the end of that tunnel much stronger, and we learned a lot. We learned how to work cross-functionally better, but we almost doubled in size when those acquisitions closed.
This week's podcast is sponsored by my friends at Cypress Growth Capital. My favorite milestone for practical SaaS founders is after you've survived the first few crazy years and you have some repeatable sales and a growing team and perhaps a little profit showing up. You could grow faster with a little outside capital, but the thought of raising money from VCs would change your whole game. And we know VC funding is the most expensive growth capital on the planet. That's why so many practical SaaS founders I know have partnered with Cypress Growth Capital when they hit that predictable growth inflection point. For 15 years, Cypress has provided non-dilutive, growth funding to bootstrap SaaS founders, including many of the successful founders I've had on this podcast. They love practical founders. Cypress provides enough patient capital for you to invest in your growth without giving up any of your precious equity or having to guarantee a loan personally. Their investment team has people like you who have grown and sold successful software and technology companies, and their operational and entrepreneurial experience helps them give you strategic guidance at those key inflection points in your business. So go to cypressgrowthcapital.com/practical and learn more, and contact Cliff Santel at Cypress to see if there's a fit. Now back to our podcast. Well, Bryan, it all sounds so the sweetness and light of there we were, and then we raised some money, and then we grew, and then we, then we acquired companies, and now we're 150 plus employees. And you're calmly going through this. There must have been some craziness at every step of these adventures, and you have a high tolerance for pain and an ambition as well. So, and you're getting through these things. You're building a very valuable company, and one of the big leaders.
Well, it's. I may seem calm right now, but I can assure you, the seas were not always calm. I have a lot more gray hairs than I did when I started this company. And starting a company is so hard. It is so hard to take that plunge. I keep telling my wife and my good friends that are outside of Boostlingo, I don't know if I would do another zero revenue company. But I've said that before, and then that was prior to doing Boostlingo. So it's kind of an addiction in a way. But yeah, there were multiple moments early on in Boostlingo where I didn't know we were going to make payroll. There was, in our first couple of years, I remember distinctively, we were running out of that first seed round of cash. Some of the features we were custom building for some of our early beta customers, they were not happy with. Oh. And we had designed the wrong way. And so we pivoted 15 times in the first 2 years in terms of like what we wanted to build and what we needed to go do. We were nimble, but there were multiple times where I would say we were on the verge of throwing in the towel. But every time we got almost to that line, there was a glimmer of hope, right? We would finally see one of these customers start adopting this module we had built for them, right? Or, we would get a lead from this giant opportunity that wasn't in our pipeline before, and it gave us new hope. But I talk about all these pivots, but I think part of the reason we were successful is that our mission hasn't really changed, right? Who we were at a core, even though we were changing kind of our day-to-day tactical things and even our strategy, our mission wasn't changing. Our core values weren't changing.
What you were about and why
what we were about and what we wanted to set out to do. And we weren't going to let anything get in our way. But yeah, it's scary when you're thinking, do I need to take a second mortgage out to pay my employees? That's scary. And, in those early days, people think, once the company reaches a certain size, it'll get a little bit easier. You hire a smart team around you. No, it doesn't. It just gets crazier. But those early days, I would say, are the most stressful. They are definitely the most stressful.
So, Bryan, we have a lot of founders who are listening to the podcast who have an idea and they're getting on the field, and then they're that early startup insanity phase, looking for it and trying to stay alive, surviving and running experiments. What is it about this language market that made you say, let's go do this? You didn't come from this industry. What was it that made you so sure that there was an opportunity here that was worth all the pain?
Yeah, really good question. So number one of my co-founders, Dieter, he had worked in the language industry for a long time. So even though I didn't know much about the language industry back in 2015, he had worked, I think at that time, 8 years for different language service companies. So he had quite a bit of background. And this was a friend of mine that I had met through one of the investors in Boostlingo. So they brought this idea to me in its very early stages and said, we'd love to get you involved and operate this business. And
they were recruiting a CEO founder.
Yeah. This was very early on. They were recruiting me before there was a product or any revenue. But there was people ask me a lot, what's the most important thing with a startup? Is it the market? Is it the product? Is it the people? Like, which is the most important? Because there's no question that they're all important, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a good product, that's a problem. If you hire terrible people, you're not going to do very well. But I always argue the market's the most important,
Yep.
because if you have the best product and the best people, but there's nobody there to buy it, what does it matter? And what I loved about the language industry, the first thing I always look at is, how big is this addressable market? How big of a company could this be? What is the competitive landscape? And is there an opening, a window for technology innovation,
Yeah.
right? Could we build a better mousetrap that would disrupt? And what we saw were giant companies that had built amazing businesses that we viewed had some antiquated tech, right?
Yeah.
And so we saw that and we said, okay, this is our opportunity to come in and disrupt. The more you can disrupt, generally, the bigger the opportunity. So that was number one. We knew we could hire good people. We already had a giant Rolodex of people to recruit, right? So I would say, be mindful of the addressable market that you're jumping into, because you could do
But you,
everything else right. And if
but
you
you're
don't have,
Silicon Valley, right? And this
yeah,
disruptive, we're going to go out into these old legacy businesses, and Silicon Valley people are going to disrupt them, right? Not just with software, but we're going to do it better. But you looked at a large market and disrupting and fast growth, and you came out of the business side of the software industry, not the tech side. You know, you weren't playing the VC disruption playbook, right? Raise a
no.
ton of money and go for it. You were doing it in careful, frugal, painful steps to go validate it and see what was going to work.
Yeah, I think what scares me about the VC world, and no offense to founders that have taken VC money,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
some of them have had terribly
of
successful. I mean,
course.
wonderfully successful exits, not terribly successful. That's an oxymoron. But what I would say is, to me, when you are in that stage of a startup, I couldn't imagine having the pressure
Yes.
of performing. Like, you need to have just complete focus on what you're building and not even think about revenue at that stage. I mean, we weren't even thinking about revenue. We were just thinking about, how do we get people to use this? Like, how do we get customers to start touching this software? And the nice thing about my angel investors is they were passive and they trusted
Yeah.
us. It was
Yeah.
very hands off, right? And I also know that a lot of VC investments fail, right? That's their model. They
Yeah.
have home runs and they have failures,
Yeah.
and like, I think that's because potentially, and not every VC firm's the same. Some are probably wonderful in how they treat their founders, but I was always scared to get into that model because
Yeah.
I just felt like it gave you an instant handicap at a time where you can't afford any handicaps. You need
Well,
to
Brian,
be,
that's an unusual way to think. You were in San Francisco this time.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
this is like VC central, like like SaaSters exploding, and there's money. Everybody's raising 10, 50, $100 million, and you're saying, I don't want any of that. Did that feel unusual? Did you feel like the least
yeah. And I
cool
have a
kid?
lot of friends that are VCs, and
Yeah,
no offense to them, they've done very well and they've invested in some really amazing companies. So I do feel maybe I have a little bit of an exception to the rule.
but you were just
But
let's say a practical founder at heart. It didn't feel comfortable playing, the VC style game.
yeah, I just don't know why dilute yourself early on when you haven't even proven out fully the business concept yet.
Yeah.
Like, why do that? To me, it doesn't make much sense. Now, if you have a reputation as this amazing founder, you've gone and sold a company for $1 billion, right? You can go raise a bunch of VC money on amazing terms,
Mhm.
because that reputation, you've already built such an amazing
Yeah.
reputation. I think if you're one of those people, maybe it makes a lot of sense to go the VC route, because you're getting amazing terms when you don't even have any revenue. But we didn't even really get into conversations with VCs because it just wasn't something we wanted to do at that time.
This translation market was big, but not even interesting to VCs, not sexy enough.
Yeah, not that, from what I could tell, nobody was investing in the market from the VC world, at
Yeah.
least at that
Well,
time.
you got it, and you started experimenting, talking to potential customers, building things. running fast to see trying to get to some kind of value. What was your first beachhead where you said, we finally got something that customers pay for? We know there's more of the messaging and the value story, and the kind of customer is kind of repeatable. Maybe you're at 500,000 or 1 million in revenue. What was that first thing that you were in the beginning?
Really good question. I think there's multiple moments, but I would say in 2018, we started to see customers, it sounds ridiculous to say, not cancel.
Yeah,
they
yeah.
they
That's the
started
first thing.
growing. Yeah, I mean, I would say our first 5 or 6 customers, maybe there's a couple that stuck with us. They basically canceled in the first 4 months. And this is like way back in 2017. And it was just because we had some of the features they needed, but like if you think about table stakes features, we maybe had 20% of the place settings. Like we were far cry, right? But maybe when you get to 70% of those place settings, customers are going to be like, wow, I'm getting more value than I was with my Excel spreadsheets or whatever antiquated system I was
It's
using
not
before.
perfect, but
Yeah,
it's
it's not
better.
perfect, but and what we saw was not only that they were retained, that they were growing. So these language service partners were adding more of their end user customers into the platform, which led to more of that consumption revenue we talked about. And I
Yeah.
said, whoa, we have customers now that are doing $50,000 a year. They started off paying us, maybe it was $10,000 a year. They wouldn't be doing that unless they were getting a lot of value out of our software. So we need to wash, rinse, and repeat. So I think anytime you find a repeatable sales cycle, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
And then I would say there was always sort of this, remote interpreting was growing before COVID hit. It was already growing, I think, probably at a 20, 30% CAGR. But there was still a lot of resistance to it from our language service providers because they made a lot of money from providing in-person interpreting, and they didn't want to necessarily disrupt that or cannibalize that revenue.
Oh, yeah.
But COVID changed that whole game. Like it made those LSPs say, "Oh, I don't have a choice. My
Wow.
hospital customer can't do in-person interpreting anymore. I have to provide remote interpreting." And we knew once more of these providers did remote interpreting that it was never that trend would never slow down, even when the pandemic went away, because the economic drivers were so compelling. So I think during that 2020 COVID time period, I that would probably be my second moment
Yeah.
where I was
Uh-huh.
like, this business could be really big. This business could
Okay.
be much bigger than we had even imagined when we started it.
And you used that angel investment and the investment that you put in a few $1 million to build the product and get it going and so forth. And you found that it was working, and you had built effective but early remote interpreting platform just before COVID, right? When
Yeah,
remote was mandated by law. So you had a stroke of luck there and you were ready
struggle
for
luck.
it, right?
Yep.
And you took advantage of it. And then all these legacy providers that were resistant to do any remote, came running to your platform and you kept on growing.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So doesn't it seem like COVID was a decade ago at this point? I mean, we maybe shaking off all the scars and, the
It's
craziness
crazy
that
to
we,
think about that what we went through, right? It's
oh my gosh.
you forget you're in an environment where everybody was wearing masks and like,
Yeah.
I remember taking a flight in 2020 where there's like 4 people on the plane. They all had masks on. It was a
Yeah.
very surreal experience. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does seem like it was a long time ago.
So you kept growing, you were adding people, and now you're a remote company in Austin. Did you go from in person, that crazy in person culture, very San Francisco, everybody? My son lives in San Francisco and everybody's in person and that kind of thing. And then you went to Texas based and remote in 1 year, something like that?
Pretty much.
Oh
Yeah, it
my
was a
gosh.
crazy shift. Even before I moved to Austin, right? I was living in California, but I could never see my employees. We could never go to the office. And
During COVID,
that
right?
yeah, during that, imagine the culture shock to our business. We're used to seeing each other every day and now we can't see each other at all. It was quite a 180 event for us,
Mm-hmm.
but we held the glue together really well. A lot of virtual games online and virtual happy hours during that time period. But now we have over 45 employees in Austin, so we do
Mm.
have an office here, and we do see each other. We still have about a dozen or so employees in the Bay Area. So we
Yeah.
kept a lot of those employees. I go back there often. I have family in Northern
Yeah.
California as well. But we do have the majority, like Austin is definitely now our home base. We have a lot of employees here, but a lot of our company is distributed. A lot of people work from home.
Mhm.
Even our folks in Austin, we're usually in the office a couple days a week. But we try to be somewhat flexible and have that nice balance where you have a sort of a hybrid approach.
Yeah. And you have those are the employees of your company, but you have, I don't know how many language interpreters, contractors in your network. Is it thousands?
Yeah, I'd say about over 17,000
Thousands.
language interpreters use our software. And they use it in a lot of different ways. Of course, a lot of them take on-demand calls using
Mhm.
our platform. So they're answering calls or making a living as a freelance interpreter.
They can sign
And
up for
so,
hours and get it like Uber. Yeah, that kind of
yeah,
thing.
totally. And not
Okay.
only that, they can work for 10 different LSCs and take jobs from each of those LSCs. So they can be contracting with 10 different companies. They're answering all those calls through our software. But as I describe it, it is millions of people use Microsoft Word that don't work for Microsoft Word or Microsoft. Lots of people use Boostlingo software. Lots of interpreters use Boostlingo software, but none of them work for us directly. We are the software ecosystem that connects it all together.
And you just mentioned a few things, but let me verify. So this is the CRM for a request. I want a language service, and it's the Uber interface that says I'm available next Tuesday between these times, and I speak these languages, and I have these qualifications. It's the matching, it's the scheduling, it's the billing. Is it the Zoom platform that does the video and phone system? Do you have to use your platform to engage in a certain way, or can you do it on Zoom, somebody else's platform?
Yeah, it depends on the use case. So we have some of our software platforms integrate natively with Zoom and Microsoft Teams. So you
Okay.
can, for example, one of the big use cases we support is what we call remote simultaneous interpreting. So think of like a keynote address where you have Tim
Mm,
Cook at Apple got 20,000 employees on this keynote address, and 3,000 of those employees don't speak English. And they want to hear what Tim Cook is saying in their native tongue. So they are in the platform and they say Portuguese, and whatever Tim's saying in their headphones, they hear Portuguese, right?
wow.
We have human interpreters in the background in virtual booths that you don't see that are saying what Tim is saying, and you're hearing the interpreter say what Tim is saying.
Right. It's like the
Very
United
different,
Nations, everybody's
very,
got their
yeah,
headphones and that kind of thing. So, okay.
100%. That is an
Okay.
RSI multilingual event, very different than the doctor talking to the patient. And
I
that's a
see.
very different product that we sell. That
That's interesting.
product integrates with Zoom, integrates with Microsoft Teams. So you do not have to have that multilingual event. We do have a native platform you can use. But as you
Mhm.
can imagine, a lot of our customers use Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and they just plug in all that technology behind the scenes.
Well, and some of this is in government, healthcare, and other sensitive areas. It isn't just,
That's right.
a meetup or a simple sales call. It's HIPAA compliant, security compliant,
These are
government.
emotional conversations. You think about talking to your doctor about, I don't know, cancer, emotional, and then just the nuance of language, right? You've got sarcasm and tone and slang.
Right.
You
Okay.
know, interpreters have a very hard job. They have to go through a lot of coursework to figure this out. And these are also
Oh,
some of these nuances are the hardest things for machines to figure out. Whereas a low complexity, simple conversation, Greg is going to the sushi restaurant in Japan and you just want to order a couple things from the menu. Google Translate will work great for that.
yeah.
Very different situation.
Right. And how is AI working in your system now? It could be working to coordinate and, do the management better, faster, easier, matching the right people and the rest. But is it doing something in that live translation zone? Has the AI reached the live interpreting?
Oh yeah, I mean, you just have to watch Sam Altman on stage a couple times to see their virtual interpreter presentation. ChatGPT. I mean, what a crazy last 3 or 4 years, right?
Oh,
We've
yeah.
seen in technology innovation. It's a
Yeah.
renaissance, I would call it.
And you weren't
Uh,
predicting this even probably 2 years ago before ChatGPT.
well, it's interesting. The very first day of Boostlingo, like literally the day I started, I remember this was back in 2016. There was a viral video on Facebook of these guys in this virtual headset doing like AI speech to speech interpreting. I don't think it worked very well, but we knew kind of this is where technology is going. We knew that AI was going to have a bigger impact. I would argue back in 2016. I don't know if I would have predicted how quickly it's progressed, but it's providing what I would consider a gigantic opportunity in our industry. So one of the analogies I always make is like photos and cameras, right? In 1990, Greg, how many pictures did you take every week versus how many pictures did you take in the last week, right? There's probably 1,000 times more pictures taken.
Yes, yeah. My kids, when they go back and they say, "Where are all your photos?" And like, here's the 6 from that year, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
6 from that trip or something like that. You had to pay for it and it was physical and all that. But I get. So there's an explosion that's
there's an explosion that happened. But why is that? Why did that explosion happen? Well, you used to have to take your camera into the Walgreens and get it developed. It wasn't as user friendly as the iPhone is, where you just pick it up. My belief is that language interpreting and language access, because of AI, is going to expand by exponentially over the next 10 years. The market is going to expand exponentially, and AI is going to play a bigger and bigger role in that. For example, our customers are already using some of our meeting summaries and transcripts in a lot of the calls that we do. And we can spit that out in a lot of different languages. Some of our products are even using speech-to-speech technology. Most of our regulated industry customers don't want AI. And I think for good reason. They're worried about not just the accuracy and the latency, but
privacy,
compliance, privacy. Yeah. I mean, so we have to be mindful about the applications of AI and where we use it. But I think in the long run, it's great for language access. And that's the mission of our business, is to be the platform that delivers language access, in the long term. And I could see a scenario 10 years from now where 1,000 times as many jobs are going through our platform.
I thought everybody's going to speak English in 50 years.
Wow. You may not need to have people that speak English if the robots can do all the translating, right? And back then, 50 years from now.
Well, I've seen the transformation in global technology business since the 90s. Used to travel to Europe, and a lot of French people didn't speak English, and Germans didn't speak English, and Italian didn't speak English. But now everybody in tech speaks English. We don't see what the opportunity is. The other, the rest of the 95% of the world, that is the tech zone in the developed countries here. Bryan, where do you see this going? You have a big market, you have some investor backers, you're in multiple segments of the market with a suite of products now. It's not just one thing for one customer. You've got a huge marketplace. Where do you go? Where does this go in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think it gets back to our mission, right? So Boostlingo, we're building, our technology is building tools and software workflows and platforms that allow for more language access. And it allows our customers and the clients they serve to increase language access and remove language barriers. That's ambitious because there's a lot of language barriers. Just look at the United States alone. We have 35 million people, it's estimated, maybe 40 million, that don't speak English fluently.
Yeah.
That person, when they go out into society, whether it's their grocery store, their bank, it's not just their doctor. Everywhere they go, they need something that helps them communicate better. We want to be that intersection, not just
from
in
the
United
individual
States,
to the enterprise, I'm hearing, right? Do you say that? Yeah.
all over the place. Now, we are not a consumer business today. It's all business to business. Yeah. But what I would say is our businesses that we sell to, our customers, they work in underserved communities. Yeah. They are helping people every day. I mean, we hear stories about a person in an ambulance who doesn't speak English, and because of our app, he was able to communicate with the EMT, and it potentially could have helped him save his life.
Right.
And those things are very motivating. To build tech that is actually doing good in the world is really a motivating factor. But I think where this is going, 90% of our revenue is in the United States. There's a huge international expansion opportunity.
Yeah.
How do you take it global? Yeah. How does AI help us take it global? Because right now we support 200 languages to and from English, right? But now you start thinking about not French into English and Arabic into English and Japanese into English. Now you're talking about French into German.
Yeah.
Now there's
I hear they
100,000.
don't talk to each other much.
Yeah, exactly. Not in the US, but in
Yeah.
France, they need that. And so now
Yeah.
you have hundreds of thousands of different language pairs. How do you build
Right.
a network for that? Well, AI can help. So we see global expansion as a big driver for growth. We also see M&A. There's going to be more opportunities. You look at this ecosystem right now. There's so many new startups all over the place. I think there's a lot of really interesting things that we'll always keep an eye on.
So you're
Um,
now the platform that's going to acquire these cool kids that say you're the strategic acquirer. They've got all this big customer base. We have this technology. We can be much bigger inside Boostlingo, that kind of thing.
yeah, potentially. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not growth lever number one. We're not
Yeah.
like
Right.
we're not setting out next year to say, oh, we're going to buy 3 companies. We are very mindful and careful with who we buy, and when we have so much organic growth,
Yeah.
it's not
Awesome.
always necessary, but we think it's an opportunity that we need to continue to invest in.
Right. So
So I
Bryan,
would say,
let me hear this straight. Like this scrappy company that almost died and didn't make payroll, let's say 6, 7, 8 years ago, right? That finally got it going and got some angel investment, didn't raise VC funding, got into this massive but sleepy market. And from what it sounds like, you could build $1 billion revenue business here.
I think we will, but I think
Wow.
you cannot get to where we are without going through serious challenges, adversity, and every founder I've talked to that started big companies, there were moments of like crisis, like
Near death experience.
not just like I had a bad week, like
Yeah. Yeah.
existential, like
Yep. I've been there.
we're and you talk to founders all the time, so I'm sure you hear this, but it's crazy, right? To think about where we came from and where we are today. What a journey.
But you also didn't say, and we need to raise $100 million and bet it all and so forth. You can be a practical company and get there, at a pretty steady rate. You have a very efficient business, right? And you just keep growing faster and faster every year, or empowering yourself to grow. Do you think you'll
Yeah,
need outside capital to,
we
grow?
are. We're I think currently no, but
Yeah.
that can change, right? If we see new avenues for growth that we feel like we need to invest in, we certainly can look at that. And Mainsail would certainly support that if we
Mm.
made the right case to them. So I think I call our current stage of growth, because we still feel like a startup. I feel like we're adolescents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I describe us as adolescents, and people will ask me, well, why do you say that? And I say, well, we still have a
That's
lot
the
of
beginning.
growing pains.
Yeah. Right.
And we do. It's really hard. This where we are right now is a really hard stage, because you start to get all these kind of big company ideas like structure and things we've always tried to have a very like flat, transparent organization, and you want to keep that feeling, you want to keep that startup feeling, but yet you also have to grow up a little bit. Like it can't be the wild wild west. So I think for every stage of growth you have to bring in new people that have lived that stage,
There you go.
and that would
Yeah.
be advice I would give to any founders. That I would be very surprised if any startup had the same 7 people on their management team at 40 employees than they did at 600. I don't think that's very common.
There's a couple transformations in there between,
Yeah.
the 50 employees, the 150 employees, the 500 employees. Things change. It's not because of the market size or the number of transactions. It's because the number of people that are coordinated doing that. Now you're a real CEO, or maybe an adolescent, CEO growing into the new role. You're no longer the scrappy sales guy founder, right? Making
Yeah.
stuff up and, over the weekend and selling it on Monday. But how are you doing in your journey to be, a scalable CEO?
Yeah, I learn every day. I learn
Yeah.
from the people around me. And by the way, I still feel like I'm a little bit of a scrappy, salesy.
Yeah. Okay. There you
See,
go.
I tell some of our sales reps all the time, like, put me on a call with a customer. I want, put me in the
What?
ring.
Yeah. Right.
I think what I've learned is I don't care how smart you are and how great of ideas you have, like you have to find a great team around you that you
Hmm.
trust. And there's an old adage. I used to work at a company called Sonic Wall, and
Yeah, sure.
the CEO of Sonic Wall used to talk about trust. This trust is given, not earned.
Hmm.
And I really believe that when you hire somebody,
Oh,
they don't have to prove to you that they can do their job. You trust them to do their job implicitly. And that has served us very well. Like, people don't want to be micromanaged. You hire qualified people with the right values. That's the key, cultural fit.
yeah.
Because you could hire really, really smart people, but if they don't match your values or your culture, it's poisonous. And you find the right people for the roles. You have a strong people function. Like, one of the things I undervalued early on is just how important HR and people it are. Right? I mean, that's such a key part of the growth success. And then I've learned to get out of the way where I don't need to be in the way. When you're early stage, like, you want to be involved in
Everything.
everything. You're
Hmm.
tentacle in everything, and then you start realizing I don't have that many tentacles. I just don't have as many tentacles. If I ever want to see my kids, like, if I want to have a family life, you have to be able to let go. And I think, it's understated how hard that is for some people. Like, a lot of CEOs that aren't able to do that, I don't think they're ever going to be able to lead a company that's, our size, yet alone 500 or 1,000 people.
Well, you've probably heard the old adage: leadership is an exercise in letting go.
Yes.
Especially if a 50% growth rate, you're more than doubling every 2 years, and it feels like a different company, probably every 18 months, in how you guys operate. New
Yeah.
services, new layers, new scale, new regions, all this kind of thing. I've been on the journey to 100 million twice, and I'm familiar with the phases there. That 150, 200 employee one is one of the most challenging phases, because that scrappy startups thing starts to feel very unnatural, and those magic tricks don't work
Right.
anymore. But you don't want to become a bureaucracy, so you're in a
And
sweet
how do you
spot,
keep
right?
the culture fun? Right. That's
Yeah,
the other thing. I
right.
think that becomes really hard.
Yeah. And so that's part of the role of the CEO, is to, keep a line on that. And that's one of the threads you have. You're not going to hire everybody, but you can help determine what are the rules of the road for everybody else who's hiring there. So usually I ask for, what advice do you have for founders? But you gave a great one there for founders who are entering the scale journey. It's about being this kind of CEO that grows up, and the senior team and the leadership, and the team that it's all about the team on the road to 100 million in revenue. Is there anything else you'd like to add for practical founders out there? Some general advice that would be
Well,
useful?
yeah, I think it's one of the lessons I've learned is you need to unplug sometimes.
Ah,
Like, I think that was really hard for me early on, but I think every month I am intentional about a routine. So one of the things I found that
mm,
helps me is you know I have my work day routine, and then I have my intentional not work day routine. And I don't know if this is works for all founders, but it's certainly helped me a lot. Is trying to do as many of those repeatable things, those habits. Whether it's you're running in the morning for 45 minutes, or you're meditating, or whatever your thing is. Do that thing. You will show
mm,
up better for work. Running a business is probably the hardest thing that anybody could do,
yeah,
especially a high growth startup
yeah.
business, and you have to keep your sanity.
What's your thing that keeps your sanity? Is it you take a day break? I don't know, like maybe you take Saturdays off or something like that, or you have a run in the morning. What do you do that keeps you sane?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very intentional with. I do a lot of road biking.
Oh, great.
I'm very intentional with just making sure I have a certain amount of time with my kids every day.
Mm,
They give me energy. I try before I go to sleep each night to not be on screens for an hour. Read whatever, unwind. You get better sleep that way. I think getting at least 6 hours to 7 hours of sleep every night, which doesn't maybe sound like a lot, but it's probably a lot from an average
yeah.
founder standpoint. All those things help you keep your sanity, because when you start showing up to work not as your best self, it's understated how much that impacts the team. Like when I was 25 or 26, I would look up, and I worked at these small startup technology companies. I used to, be a
Yeah.
salesperson at a tech company, and you don't realize how influential the leadership is. Like, at least
Mm.
I didn't at the time. But one thing I've learned as you get older is it really does. Leadership has such an impact in so many different ways that if you've got to show up as your best self. If you don't, I would argue the chances of your company being successful go down pretty dramatically. And so
Those are
take care
very
of
wise
yourself would
words.
be my, yeah.
Yeah. And most people don't know who haven't been through it before, but if you've got 150 employees, that's pretty heavy weight out
It
there.
is
Now, and
for
you've got
sure.
thousands of people that make a living on this platform and so forth. The weight gets heavier as it
It
goes. So,
does. A lot of people
yeah.
count on our technology, and we have to be mindful of that. And something I think about every day.
Well, that's an amazing story, Bryan. Congratulations on your practical founder success in the journey so far. We'll be watching for you when Boostlingo is finances the stadium for the World Cup or something like that, and the big signs are there. We see with the World Cup signs, for soccer around the world. We'll know that you have hit a new phase of growth. So
Yeah.
thanks for sharing your story on the Practical Founders podcast.
It was a lot of fun, Greg. Thanks for having me. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Bye.
Thanks for watching this week's founder interview on the Practical Founders podcast. Be sure to hit like and then subscribe to my Practical Founders YouTube channel to keep up with my weekly videos for serious software founders who are building valuable companies without big funding. Check out my blog and information about my Practical Founders CEO peer groups at practicalfounders.com. And follow me on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going. See you next week.